everybody. How are you guys? I hope everybody's having an amazing start to their day. Happy Halloween. I hope everybody can hear me well as well. I kind of adjusted my microphone. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Okay, so a couple quick announcements. First announcement, first announcement, really important that I want everybody to know. We've updated the workbooks, the vast majority of them. We're still going through and updating more. We've made them fillable. When they show up and they're fillable, unless you download them, they probably look funny. So you have to download them and then you can type on them or print them and they're the proper looking version. Basically, like there's a difference between the program or whatever it's called that you know how like when you go on Microsoft Word, I don't know the words for it because I'm not very tech savvy, but you go on Microsoft Word and you have like sometimes the format changes between like if you receive a file from somewhere and then I'm not going to do a very good job of explaining this, but basically the formatting is different to make it fillable. And so you have to download it so you get the proper version. I'm going to probably repeat this on the webinars for a little bit until everybody knows this. Next thing, we are adding morning and evening routines. I'm so excited for this. I don't know if you guys, I hope you guys all really, really are excited for this too. I'm probably more excited than most people. But I just really wanted to have like community. It was so important to have community for the winter and some of the stuff that's happening. So we are adding our attachment coaches are going to be hosting morning and evening routines, socials, mastermind groups. We're going to test a few throughout November. And then hopefully for December, we're going to have like almost a daily event for community members to be able to jump on to connect. We're going to hold them at different times so that it really includes people from all different time zones. We'll do morning ones, we'll do evening ones. So that will be very exciting and stay tuned for that. And you'll get to see people face to face, which I think is the best thing ever. And then also 90-day challenge starts November 15th, really high level. Our details for the 90-day challenge are the goal is to complete 6 courses. So 2 courses a month, 1 course every 2 weeks, or 2 and a bit weeks. For the 3 months. If you don't complete it, it's okay. There will be prizes for people that do. And you want to complete the workbooks and attend 2 webinars a week and post in the Facebook group daily. And basically like we have these things so that you have this accountability model. You can check in with people. You have the support. You have goals for what you're trying to get out of the PDS coursework. And I very much recognize that not everybody can complete that many courses that quickly because of life commitments and things like that. So you can always just join the 90-day challenge and you can pick like what you want your personal goals to be. Maybe for you, it's to complete 4 courses or 2 courses in that period. So make it into your own, but get involved in the community and you have that extra support and we're going to track progress and talk about different things and all of that stuff. So that's an announcement. Advanced Core Wounds course is out today. Sorry, it was supposed to be out late last night, and then we were just a little bit behind on the editing. But that is all done now. It's a bit of an extra long course. So that's a very exciting course. It's a resource course. So it's meant to be for like if you find yourself stuck in a certain area, you can just dive into a module that has that there. And you can sort of jump into it from there. So those are all of the plans, the additions, all the exciting things that are happening. And we will dive into the content for today. And like ultimately, I think the vision, sorry, I'm going to go on a tangent for 1 second. I think ultimately the vision is like how I see the personal development school, like the direction moving in. And we're always like, talking with our team. And of course I have a business partner in the school. So it's not just me, but we always go through and sort of work through everything and make these big plans. And I think what we're sort of hoping for over the course of the next year is to bring in like other people, so other coaches who will host webinars or therapists who will host webinars about different topics and really build that system out. And then also have more guest courses come in. I'll still keep hosting courses all the time because I have so many friggin' courses that I want to create. So we're going to keep doing that. But eventually we'll have So we finally chose a gut health person who's going to talk about it. She's a naturopathic doctor and she's amazing. And I can't wait. So she's going to be coming in. Anyways, we're going to have all these different people. I have an amazing friend of mine who also has a huge YouTube channel with about 500,000 subscribers who talks all about finance and like budgeting and mastering that area of your life. And so we're going to have somebody come in and build that course. Because to me, like, personal development is literally all 7 areas of life. So we're really building up all the stuff we had to get out, that's so important that really creates the framework for like self-mastery of mental, emotional. And then we're going to be adding these other layers and hopefully have events all the time, long term, like just have coaches who are running things all the time so everybody can sort of make them. Anyways, this is like the long-term plan and I'm just very excited about it. So I will dive into the questions. We'll start today. We're talking about the dismissive and anxious preoccupied interactions. So we'll dive into that, but I'll start as I always do by answering a few questions and then diving into some of the things that you'll see across the different stages of a relationship. Okay, so Expect Abundance says, hello, how are you? I like that name. That's pretty cool. As an FA with a DA, 30 years married, we've made leaps and bounds to become secure. Congratulations. That's amazing. A lot of unacceptable behavior has been curbed, but the connection that was lost over time is a struggle to regain. My DA has very little conversational intimacy skills. His coping skills were to stay silent and small. In my anxious side, I did the work for him. The invitations to engage and connect through conversation, the conversational exchange seems to be such a foreign concept for him. He is curious, but it was never modeled. How do you explain such a concept? This is a great question. So what you want to do from here is have habits that are healthy to engage and to communicate like what you need and why it matters. So you might start by saying, hey, like for me, and I totally understand because it probably wasn't modeled to you. For me, part of like how I give and receive love is deep conversation, connection. And I think it's really easy for people to fall into this mentality or framework where they go, but we know each other. And the reality is people are growing and changing and evolving nonstop every single day. And so we don't know the new layers of each other. And we don't know, like, there's always so much to learn about another person's internal reality. And these are the things that make me feel really connected. And so what I really suggest for people, you can get apps on your phone. Eventually this will be a PDS app, but that won't be till next year. But you can get different apps on your phone. I just switched over my phone. Okay, so there's an app and I really like his work. His name is Dr. John Gottman. And he's from the Gottman Institute. And he actually did a study where he put couples in a bed and breakfast and had them stay in the bed and breakfast for free and fed them and all these different things in exchange for being able to film their interactions 24 hours a day, nonstop. And this was a really comprehensive research study he did. And he has an app and it's called the Gottman Card Decks. And it's like an app where you push and different questions come up. And they're to spark deep conversation. And there's literally so many apps like this. I use them with everybody when I go out for dinner or I don't know, I really enjoy them. And so you can say this is it. And I find what's really beneficial. And there's also questions for deep connection in I think it's actually in our advanced courses, we have our commitment oriented questions. I think in the fear of all the regular attachment style courses, at least the fearful, avoidant, and anxious, not the advanced ones, but the intro ones, you have self-discovery questions. We have another set of questions. I honestly forget which course it's in, but I'll let you know. I'll try to find it. And it's 60 questions for deep connection in a relationship. So we have all these things that you can use to communicate about, to connect over, to have, to open up deeper conversation. And sometimes you have to show him this is what it is. And I would ask, like, will you, play this question game with me? Or will you, engage in some of this stuff? This is really fun for me. It's really enjoyable. And what do you need for connection? And so you're going to have to sort of model it to him by initiating and pioneering it. But if you have a system that kind of works for you, and especially I find for dismissive avoidance, because it's so foreign to them a lot of the time, if you have this ability to say, look, it's a game, like people like this stuff, it sort of normalizes it for this person. And maybe to start off with, you can say you're allowed to pass on questions if you don't feel comfortable. And just to respect the boundaries and to sort of ease into the whole dynamic. And I think that will be very beneficial. So great question. I love that. Hello, Halima. How are you? Hello, Bunamigo. How are you today? Okay, so Bunamigo says the FA admitted last night she's been struggling more with recovery than she was leading us to believe. I found the honesty and vulnerability really refreshing. Could this be because I'm leading by example? I just can't believe I'm healing. My internal dialogue, I know. My internal dialogue is much kinder to me, and it's my favorite part. I'm very grateful you are teaching us to reprogram, Thais. That is so sweet, and I'm so happy to hear. And it's kind of been a theme the past little while here, I notice, is people going like, I feel unsafe being this happy, or I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. And part of our healing, and I think we talked about this on the last 2 webinars with different people's questions, is part of what you also want to practice doing is being like, it is safe to feel these things that I'm feeling right now. It is safe to feel like I'm healing. It is safe to give and receive, all to normalize your growth is really important. And it's actually a step in the reprogramming process. So excellent point that you're making. And congratulations, because that's you doing the work. And yeah, it can absolutely be because you're leading by example. And so I think that sort of sets the tone. And I think also when you set boundaries, people kind of respect you a little bit more when you're setting boundaries. And then sometimes they sort of admire or look up to you if you're also healing and leading by example. And then sometimes the FA as well could possibly be sharing because she's like, oh, I want you to understand me. And wanting to sort of open up from that dynamic. So great work. Make sure you keep showing up for your boundaries. And congratulations. It's so happy to see. Okay, so Rochelle says, hi, Rochelle, how are you? Rochelle says, in the past, I ended up hurting an AA colleague of mine unintentionally by acting cold and distant when in reality, I actually liked them. After that, I experienced a lot of guilt and had the desire to apologize for my had the desire to apologize, but my DA tendencies caused me to withdraw instead. I thought that in case I do apologize, it would not look genuine as I didn't want to share my reason for the way I acted. It's very common for DAs. And I was also afraid of confrontation. We are both now on good terms and have not discussed anything about the event, but I still experience guilt. How do I manage my guilt? And in case I want to communicate about this issue with the person, what should I say? I think this is like a huge sign of healing, quite honestly, that you are like wanting to communicate about a past behavior and share something. And like, this is beautiful. You're feeling your feelings. You're aware of the source of what's causing them. And you actually have the natural impulse to like want to join and connect and talk through it. These are all very secure behaviors, just so you're aware. So I would advise to actually do that because I think that's a next step of progress in your work. And what I would also say is that if you don't want to share the whole reason, that's okay. That's perfectly acceptable. Pick a small part of it. So for example, maybe you don't want to say, this is specifically what was happening to me on that day when I was cold and distant. And maybe it was a personal reason that you don't want to share, but maybe you can say, I was having a tough time that day for things I can't get into right now, but it was a challenging day for me, or I was having a tough week, or I was going through some things in my life. So you can still give a reason that doesn't have to be the reason, but a reason that the person can relate to. And so I would encourage you to do that. I think that's like an opportunity for growth. And I think that would be a great thing to do. But again, check in with yourself, take yourself into consideration, and only you can make that decision. So great work, great awareness. You guys are fantastic. Like, you guys are just doing such a great job. Okay, so Gabriella says, hi, I'm intrigued by my ex. How are you, Gabriella? Used to tell me lots of examples of child traumas many times during our relationship. After, he would often then ask me if I experienced anything similar. I felt a deep internal resistance to sharing anything with him and would respond no, or with an empathic statement to him, even if I had experienced something similar. When we broke up, his exact words were, maybe if you had more issues or were more damaged, then things could have worked out between us. That's a very interesting perspective. But I really just can't fault you. I'm wondering whether my instinctive resistance was my not wanting to be seen and known and vulnerable, or due to instinctively not wanting a relationship built upon trauma bonding and enmeshment, but to show up as a more secure person who deals with their issues outside of the relationship. I would love to know your take on why I felt the need to do this. Thank you so much. Okay, so a couple things. I think that there's a part of you, and this is coming from past comments you've made that I noticed, that was also trying to like not show weakness a little bit. And because here's the interesting difference. First and foremost, part of it for sure is not wanting a trauma bond and enmeshment. And that is excellent. And that's extremely healthy, because you know how I stopped for a second? I'm like, oh, that's an interesting perspective. It doesn't, when we have like, oh, I'm in pain and I have issues, and so my relationships with other people who also are in pain and have issues, like that makes us a match. That makes for toxic, really painful relationships and relationship dynamics. And sure, relationships can last a little longer, but they're usually more painful and then end up not working anyways. So you're 100% on the right track, that like that wasn't the right way of going through things for sure. But I think what's interesting is that part of you was evading sharing, because I know you've been through lots of challenges, and like power to you for being so strong and working through things and showing up. And the depth that that will provide for you as a person will be very powerful and profound and beautiful. And so, you know, as you go through that, but then don't share, it's almost like you could say, you know, I went through similar things and I did this and this is where I'm at now, you know. But if you actively don't share, I would ask myself, just to be clear, I would say, you know, if I were to share, what am I afraid would happen? And see, like, was there anything based on fear, or was it literally just based on truth? And it's possible it could be just based on like not wanting that kind of dynamic. But then in that case, you might say something like, I went through challenges as well, but I don't want a relationship based on, I don't think two unhealthy people, it's like, it's the saying, my mom used to say this to me when I was a kid all the time. What is it? Two wrongs don't make a right. But it's, you know, it's an important analogy, right? That the two wounded people don't come together and suddenly make like a perfect, healthy relationship. It's the opposite. And so you were leading by example in a really powerful way, and you're really on the right track, with like enmeshment and all that stuff. But see if there's any fear in you, and I would work on reprogramming that, because your past does not make you less lovable, less amazing, less worthy of love in any way. And so you want to make sure there's no belief there that you limit yourself with. Great question. Hello, Natalie. How are you? So Natalie says, after my DA reached out during no contact, he's been really open about things like why he didn't feel secure in our relationship. I've noticed every time he's done this, he then goes quiet for a few days. Is this him deactivating? I've been surprisingly calm about it, because he's been communicating when he needs space, which is something I requested. But I'm wondering what's the best way to respond when he comes back. I've used the time to enjoy doing my own things, but I want to support him when he returns. So far, I've let him know how appreciative I am for his openness. That's amazing. And again, like another person in here doing amazing work and just really showing up. You guys are like, what a blessing that you're in a space where you're no contact. Somebody's like in and out. It's a dismissive avoidant, and you're like, okay, I'm in a good place, secure enough with myself that like, if things move along, I want to show up well, see if it can work. And if they don't, then I'm okay on my own. Like, I think that's very, very powerful. So, and I'll stop complimenting everybody so much, because I'm just going to spend half the webinar doing that instead of answering the questions. So, what I would say is what's very common for dismissive avoidance is once they're vulnerable, they deactivate after vulnerability. And it's usually for about 3 or 4 days. depending on how dismissive and how vulnerable they were. So how dismissive they are, how vulnerable they were in that specific context. So what you'll often find is that's because they then feel that all their subconscious associations of like what vulnerability means are activated. They come to the surface. So they're like, whoa, I was just so vulnerable. I feel unsafe now. I feel shame is usually a big part because they got seen. And so then they'll shut down. And so what you can do is keep encouraging, keep using positive words of affirmation, and say, hey, I appreciate so much the courage it takes, things that induce pride, right, to equilibrate shame. How you're showing up, how you're communicating, when you're sharing things, like that really means a lot. And after you share, if you feel vulnerable, or if you like, people will refer to, and it's definitely a DA thing, a shame hangover. And I think it's like coined by Brene Brown, but you can say, listen, like when you're feeling this way, or if you feel like anything after you share, is there anything I can do to make you feel supported? Because I want you to know how much I value. And then you can ask, like, what needs do you have when you're feeling that way? And that will be very beneficial as well. And again, you just keep moving the needle because you see like the person sharing, they're opening up, you're encouraging, you're feeling good. And so you're all kind of like moving down a healthy trajectory. And then you just have to keep checking in with your boundaries, opening up the conversation and all of that. So great work. Hello, Merlin. Hello, Halima. How are you guys today? Natalie, oh my gosh, so you're back into lockdown. Yeah, Canada's the same. Well, at least Ontario is pretty much the same thing. The little region I'm in isn't yet, but a lot of surrounding areas. And that's why I really, really want to have like all this community stuff to support people who are, because I don't live alone. I've got, my partner and my dog, and my whole business is online. So I feel comfortable, but I feel like a lot of people live alone, and a lot of, stuff is happening. So hopefully everything will be okay. Okay. So let's see. David. Hello, David. David Alvarez. How are you? Okay. So David says, AA, I usually do most initiating in my relationship, but then if I don't feel the relationship failing, I only get my validation in her response, and I feel stupid. Continued, but I also feel drained. I want a day to myself to break attachment. How do I do this without feeling the relationship is failing? And how do I get her to initiate first or more? Okay, so here's something that's happening. Okay, I wonder if you put an earlier question, because I just see it from AA, I usually do most initiating in my relationship. Okay, here's what's happening. I wonder if you're AA. Okay, AAs and FAs both share. I put a video out about this a little while ago, like probably a few months ago. Both share this dynamic where they associate being disconnected with the relationship ending. Okay. So when there's a disconnect, when there's a change in the pattern, the reason it's associated with the relationship ending is because it triggers the wounds of abandonment. And then we get down like the abandonment perceptual filter of reality. So what you'll often find is that A's and FAs alike, especially FAs leaning anxious, share this dynamic where if there's like, let's say you spent the weekend together and it was a great weekend, and then you didn't chat a lot on Monday, Tuesday, the fears will come up and it'll be like, oh, the relationship's ending. It's on its way out. It's like, I think it's the language you're using is almost even better. It's failing. The relationship is failing. And then you're looking for a response. And then you get into a dynamic where you're like, okay, I'm always like micromanaging the relationship, and that's exhausting. And what that is then putting you into is a bit of a codependent dynamic where like a lot of your time, energy, effort is like highly focused on the dynamic instead of feeling like you can spend, like, I want you to notice this, right? It's like you get into a relationship and now you're so busy micromanaging the relationship all the time. You don't feel like you have a life outside of the relationship that often, or you can't get into the natural flow of your own life and work on your own projects and build your own things and have your own hobbies because you're so focused right here on making sure the pattern doesn't change and the relationship doesn't fail. And then this puts you on the roller coaster where you're constantly worrying, are things falling apart? Are we going to break up? And then you micromanage, and then you feel like, oh, I'm the one doing all the work. I'm tired. It's tiring to micromanage a relationship. I want her to do some of the work. I feel like I'm always the one initiating, and you get into this sort of funny cycle. So what I would do is, number one, recognize that patterns change in relationships, and that doesn't always mean that the relationship is changing. It's impossible to have a relationship where patterns don't change because life is happening at the same time. And I think it's very easy when you're in the dating and honeymoon phase to have these expectations. And what I always recommend with people is like, get clear about what your baseline expectations are. So for example, if you're spending the whole weekend together, and then maybe you usually talk over text, 8 or 10 times a day, which is very high. And then so there's this back and forth, right? You're sort of chatting back and forth a little bit all throughout the day. What you want to be able to do is go, okay, what's healthy? Like if I'm in the dating phase right now, or if I'm in the honeymoon phase, if we just spent the whole weekend together and we have, we exchange 3 or 4 texts a day, would that still be healthy? And the answer is yes. And so sometimes you can get into micromanaging according to these subconscious expectations you've placed on the relationship that are actually way bigger than what would be healthy at a baseline level. And so that's a really important place to start, is like surface those expectations. And then it's okay to only talk 3 or 4, it's okay to have like a little bit of touch and go when you just spend all this time together. So the more you can do that, the healthier you'll get into a dynamic more quickly, number one. And number two, a lot of this is like so there's a core wound. I am disconnected, and I am abandoned if I'm disconnected. And I would do the reprogramming work around that. That's in the Advanced Core Wounds course. And then lastly, I would do a little bit of the codependency and enmeshment course. That's another important thing that will touch on some of these dynamics that are at work. And part of what you're going to see is asked of you in there is to have boundaries for yourself. So what are my boundaries around how much I want to be always focusing on this relationship, always investing my energy into like the texts and micromanaging our interactions? And B, can I keep expressing my needs to somebody? And so when you say like, how do I get her to initiate more? You communicate that that's what you want, so that the person has the clarity and then can obviously take action accordingly. And you see your needs through, and you get really clear, and you paint the picture for what it looks like. So the needs are communicated very effectively. And that's how we really start to get into a healthy dynamic this way. So great question. And it really touches on many important points in here. Nice, Merlin. Yes, you are on time today. And people can join the webinar halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, anytime they want to. So do not worry. Hello, Annette. Hello, Jen. Hello, Magni. Good to see all you guys. Hello, Ramona. Welcome. Oh, thank you so much, Annette. You would know and remember. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay, so let me see for a second. Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Natalie. You guys are so sweet. Thank you for all the really kind birthday wishes, you guys. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, so Princess K says, how do you recommend dealing with DA in direct contact? My ex has viewed my stories on social media this week for the first time since our breakup. He did this for 2 days, then immediately stopped the next day. I don't feel comfortable reaching out to him in any way, given the on and off nature of our relationship. I'd love to find a peaceful space for us with leaving things as is and allowing him the space to come forward if he wants any connection. I'd love your opinion on the small step on his part, so I know what to expect, or if there's nothing to expect beyond this. There's nothing positive that will happen if you try to reach out at this time. The only thing that's like a good response here is literally, sorry, somebody's at my door. Simba's barking. Okay, so the only thing that's like a reasonable response, honestly, is to be in a position where you can literally go, I'm going to set a firm boundary. I'm not going to communicate or reach out or anything. DAs do that. And sometimes it's in hopes that they will trigger a response from you, but it's indirect enough that they're not wanting like to go to the moon and have a full conversation and say like, let's get back together. They're not willing to go that like full distance, if that makes sense. A lot of it is really about, showing up halfway to see if you'll show up a little bit and just wanting a little like hit of connection. And that's not enough, to give your time and energy to, in my opinion, because that's the level of indirectness is going to continue that level of indirectness. And that's not what you're here or what you want to go through. And like, I saw how much you were showing up and trying to work on the relationship and you weren't getting that back. And this doesn't show that pattern has changed from his side, from his end. So I would see it. I would do the work on whatever stories come up for you. I would ask myself, what do I need? I would keep meeting my needs. I would keep, plowing ahead in the work that you're doing and showing up for yourself. And I would not be in a position where I am, overly focusing on him or any of the stuff that's happening with indirect reaching out. So that's my super strong opinion. And honestly, at this point, when it's still that indirect, what I always see is when it's still that indirect and then the person does reach out. So let's say, I've heard many, many, many stories over the years of dynamics like this, watching stories, liking photos on social media, whatever it is. When the person then reaches out, because they take that as like a direct contact, the dismissive avoidant almost always just pushes away. So unless the person's working on themselves, healing like you are, then you'll just see that person revert back to the same dynamics and patterns of behavior. So super important to recognize and super important to keep your boundaries right now. Thank you guys. Thank you all so much. Hi, Kelly. Hello, Seal. Thank you guys. Hello, Oslam. How are you? Hello, Elle. And Mariella, how are you? Thank you all so much for the birthday wishes. I am a Halloween baby. I'm wearing a dress. Oh, I thought that was addressed to me. Yes, morning and evening routines I think will be amazing. So they'll be guided, which will be very, very exciting. By the way, this indirect contact was between 6 to 7 weeks of no contact, just so you know. That was right on the target for avoidant reaction to no contact. Yes, very much. Awesome. So happy. Hello, Tam. How are you? Hello, Girl 57, second live webinar. We're so happy you're here. Okay, so can AAs try to get their DA partner back to open up as a way to feel good enough? AAs get their DA as a way to feel good enough. I wondered if sometimes we want to get them to open up in order to feel worthy, like we are worth changing for. That's a possibility. But A's and FAs both value connection so much that it's very rare for that to be like the prime motivation. That can be like a factor that plays in or something that has an impact, but it's never going to be something where it's like, this is the core reason and this is what it is and that's it. Because usually it's like, you won't value connection in a superficial enough way to just want it to like reinforce, like to boost your ego. It'll be more like, that would be really nice, but it's for connection more than anything else for most individuals. And sometimes connection equals safety. So it can have that added deep, more unconscious layer, like almost hard to even fully consciously recognize. Unconscious is sort of the more deeply buried stuff that we may not fully emotionally resonate with because it's hard to retrieve. So that's sort of where it would be, I believe. Thanks. Yeah, so excited for all this stuff too. Hello, Him Ranjit. Okay, I'm going to answer Him Ranjit's question, and then we're going to dive into the dynamics, the dating stage of a relationship between AA and DA. Okay, so Him says, happy birthday, thank you. New to PDS, welcome. Welcome to your first webinar. Very exciting. I'm DA-ish in a relationship with AA-ish for close to 8 years. A lot of long distance. She broke up with me earlier this year. She felt hurt by emotional unavailability. We had broken up 4 years earlier for the same reason, but I was able to woo her back. The last few months, we were friends for a couple of months and talking a lot of time. Something triggered her in one of our conversations about her about her hurt in our relationship and went no contact with me, blocked me on social media, and had her sister tell me. I tried contacting her a lot to see what was going on. She had her walls up. Haven't bothered her much now. Doesn't respond to me. Mostly working on myself. I want her to be happy. I also want to be with her. I love her. She loves me, but there is hurt. What should I do? You said AAs move on in a couple of weeks. It's been nearly 2 weeks. Should I contact her? Yeah. Not move on. They don't like move on, like onto a new relationship, healed, something like that. They usually suffer the most for the first initial 2 weeks. And then around the 2-week mark, they start to turn a slight corner. So they start to be like, okay, because they've kind of really gotten it all out. They can still suffer and hurt and be in pain over a breakup for a very long time after. But they turn that initial corner of it not being like the only focus of every part of their day sort of thing. So here's what I recommend. I recommend, if you love her and if you know that she wants to be with you, but there's this emotional unavailability piece and you're here working on yourself, to me, that's a huge step. And also the fact that you are having this conversation, right? Like opening up here is like a huge step. So here's exactly what I would do. I would reach out and I would say something like, hey, I'm really sorry for the way that you're feeling. And, I didn't mean to hurt you by anything I did or said or did. And I want you to know that I'm actually taking action to work on myself and my emotional unavailability. And I would tell her specifically what you've done. And I would be like, I would like things to change. I would like to work through this hurt. I need to know what you need from me because sometimes I'm not 100% clear. And I would ask specific questions. These questions really do it for people. If you ask, what does emotional availability look like to you? So that I can know, because sometimes it's a bit of a shot in the dark for me. That level of vulnerability and honesty usually really helps people to turn a bit of a corner there. So I would say that. And then I would say, I would love to have a conversation to further talk about this. I'm willing to show up with you. I'm willing to do this work. I do love you. I do want to be with you. I would say all of that. That will be very well received by her. And then I would say, but at the same time, I know that I have to respect your boundaries. And I know that you have to want to show up with me as well. So if you are, I would love to hear from you. But if I don't hear from you, I am going to respect your boundary and not reach out again, because I'm going to assume that that's what you really truly need and want. And so you have to be very clear, because a lot of AAs and FAs, but AAs the most, will think that like, if you care, you're going to fight for me. And they want that. And they view love as that. And to a certain degree, that's okay. Like, in this very situation, for you to go above and beyond and show up and say, look, I'm willing to do the work and show up with action and tell her what you're doing. That is good. Like sometimes those moments are crucial and pivotal points in relationships that end up being something really great, catalysts to move to the next level in the relationship. But if we have a dynamic that we enable in a relationship where it's like, oh, we just always fight for each other, we break up, you don't want to reinforce that. You don't want to be like, oh, I'm just going to keep chipping away at your boundaries all the time. And whenever you're not getting your way, you shut me off and you ice me out. And then you hope that I'm going to fight and do all these things. What we do when we show up that way is we enable this very dramatic dynamic to be what the relationship becomes. And so you have to be really clear, like, I'm doing the work. Look, I already have the proof, but I don't want this to be an unhealthy thing where like, I'm just fighting and fighting and fighting and trying to woo you back forever. And it's just going to be this repeat pattern where I keep fighting for you. And then we get back together and then you don't like something and you don't communicate your needs and it builds up and then you pull away again. And then I fight for you again. Like, that's not healthy. So that has to be really clear as well. So that's exactly how I would approach it. And then keep us posted on how it's going and feel free to ask questions over the next few days during the next webinars. And thank you for sharing and welcome. Hello, Purea. Hello, Max. How are you guys today? Okay, so I'm going to go into the first part of, and then I'm going to come to the 90-day challenge question. So I'm going to go into the first part of like the interactions between the dismissive and the anxious in the dating phase. Okay. So one of the biggest things that we know The dating phase is the vetting phase. This is the time we're supposed to basically collect data, be doing our research on a person. It might sound mechanical, but without doing this, we're not showing up effectively in this phase. And we are not supposed to get into the dating phase of a relationship and be like, I had a good time with that person and I think they're attractive, so this is it. Like, that's not a healthy approach to the dating phase of a relationship. If you are in a place in your life where you are absolutely not looking for a relationship because you're working on yourself, you're exploring life, whatever it might be, then that might be a fine approach. But you have to recognize that the downside of that approach, even if you're not looking for anything, is that you get connected, you get attached, and all of a sudden you have feelings for somebody when you weren't intentional about who you were spending your time with and how this person is going to impact the next decade of your life if they're a significant figure, or rest of your life if they're the person that you end up spending your life with. And so we have to recognize there's an inherent risk that comes with that when we are missing the very important ingredient of intentionality in our interactions. So I want you all to get really clear about one principle, which is our time is valuable. Our time is precious. And when we give our time not consciously to people, to interactions, we're to some degree, because the subconscious is programmed through repetition plus emotion, to some degree, whoever we're repeatedly spending our time with, it's eliciting an emotional response on us, which is going to be, out of anybody in your life, most so the person that you're dating, the person or people that you are spending your time with. If you're in the dating phase of a relationship, they're going to rub off on you a lot. And so we want to look and be intentional. Like, is this the type of person I would want to rub off on me? You know, this person's going to program me a little bit to be like them over time. And that isn't through their intentional manipulation and trying to program your subconscious mind. This is because this is how relationships and human beings work. And so when we go into the dating phase of a relationship, you have to be really clear. Am I intentional with my time? What are the qualities that I want to spend time with in other people? You might find more qualities as you go. You might go on a date with somebody and they have some qualities you never thought of or listed. And you're like, wow, these are really great qualities. And I can see how these have a positive impact. But we need to be really clear in the dating phase, whether you're anxious, dismissive, no matter who you are. What do I want? What are my non-negotiables? How is this person impacting my time? How is this person valuing and treating me and my time? And what are my needs from a dating phase of a relationship? What do I expect? And am I clear about these things in advance? And this is how you guarantee yourself the most success in these areas. Now, the other part of this that's really important is when we look at the dismissive and anxious dynamic, something really interesting to note is that there are basically polarized expectations within this set of stages, within this specific stage. So dismissives, even if they have such strong feelings, often, not always, but very often, sometimes it'll be more in the honeymoon phase, but very often would like to take the dating phase of a relationship up to 6 months, like not rushing into commitment, taking their time, really moving slowly through things. Like, that's how the dismissive tends to want to show up. And part of this is because even if they have all these feelings, remember, at the same time, their feelings are also triggering their wounds. Feelings means I am unsafe. Feeling too much means I'm unsafe. Vulnerability is unsafe. Commitment could be unsafe and make me feel trapped or powerless or afraid. And so as a relationship naturally progresses, especially into the later stages of the dating phase, that those triggers start progressing at the same time. Those scary wounds start progressing at the same time. So this person gets into this push-pull dynamic within themselves. Now, when this is happening, we now have like the dismissive avoidance feelings minus their fears. The anxious preoccupied, one of their big things that they fall into, or sort of traps that they fall into, is anxious preoccupied because they often are really eager to fill their wounds, right? To fill the perceived voids that they're carrying at a subconscious level due to lack of connection or a fear of abandonment, right? And the self-abandonment that's pervasively happening in the relationship to themselves. What you'll often see is that the anxious preoccupied individual really quickly moves from the idea of I'm attracted to somebody to I have feelings for somebody. And a secure person, separate from all insecure attachment styles, will be like, I feel attracted to somebody. So I'll spend my time, let's say we'll go in stages: attracted, attraction, feelings. Attracted is like, ooh, I think that person looks nice. I find them physically attractive, or I think that they have qualities that are very attractive. Okay. Then I am attracted is like, I feel a pull towards that person. I actually feel enough towards that person where I'm curious. I want to investigate. I want to spend my time around that person and see if there's something there. Feelings, we don't actually really get to until we start to know a person. Okay. Now, a lot of anxious or fearful, leaning anxious will feel like attracted is feelings like, oh my gosh, I felt something. And part of that is because that attracted and attractiveness in the person also activates that person, the anxious, preoccupied person's attachment system. So it triggers this like, oh, I can get my needs met. And because the anxious, preoccupied person in the relationship to themselves is often abandoning their own feelings and needs and boundaries and is in a dismissive, avoidant relationship to themselves, it's like the gas tank, like we talk about in the analogy, the gas tank is on empty. And so now I'm driving my car with my gas tank empty. The moment I see a gas station, it means a lot more to me than if I'm that person, than somebody who's fully secure, AKA has a full gas tank and they drive by a gas station, right? It's like, oh, well, if there's a special offer or, it's a different relationship. And so what will often happen as a byproduct is in the dating stage of a relationship, an anxious, preoccupied individual will get feelings or will feel attraction and then merge into their feelings very quickly and spend a lot of time in the fantasy world, which is really how we build love addiction when we hear that term. Love addiction isn't built in the one-to-one personal time. It's built outside of that time. It's built in the hours upon hours upon hours of building a fantasy and a story of a person that you fall in love with or that you get really connected to. And when we get in the fantasy of a person and we think of like how they have all these wonderful qualities and traits and they're going to be an amazing partner and they're going to, all these things we're going to do together, when you spend too much time there, your brain's like, well, this is an easy fix. It's like I think thoughts that meet my needs or give me because your brain has a hard time visualizing or telling the difference between what's visualized and what's real. So you get into this story of this person, and every time you tell this story in a way that you perceive it meets your needs, you get a little hit of oxytocin and dopamine and phenylethylamine, and you have all these neurochemical things happening within you that are further connecting you to this person. Now, the downside of that and the danger of that is the stories always come with expectations. Now we have a vision of this person, and part of why we have a relationship life cycle with 6 stages where we go dating, honeymoon, power struggle, stability, commitment, bliss. Part of why that happens in the first place is actually because of the fantasy. Because dating and honeymoon, we are equally falling in love with the fantasy of a person as we are the real person, because it isn't until the power struggle phase for a lot of people, though this isn't always the case for everybody, and hopefully not as we're doing this work. By the power struggle phase, we see more and more of the person's flaws, imperfections, vulnerabilities, fears. We have those deeper conversations. And now we're not falling in love as much with the person's the image of the person. And we actually start learning about that person's internal world and who they really are behind the perfect persona that we bring to the early phases of a relationship. We start to see those intricacies and vulnerabilities. And there's a certain, importance to that, because you're not going to necessarily sit down on your first date with somebody and say, hey, this is me. Here's all my baggage. Here's all the things that I went through as a person. Here are all the things I want. Here's the checklist. Do you fit them? And are you willing to accept me as I am right now? Like, that's just not the way. We're probably never going to make it to a second date if that's what we do. So there is value in getting to know somebody slowly over time and showing up in that way. And there is necessity in that. But the sooner we can communicate and be open and be vulnerable, the easier we set the tone for the power struggle phase to be. So we have this dynamic. We have the anxious person. We have the dismissive avoidant person. They have completely different expectations, and the anxious wants to move faster. As soon as the anxious person feels like they have feelings, they're now ready for the vast majority of the time to be ready to commit. Like, let's be in a relationship. Let's move things along. And the dismissive avoidant sees that not just as a threat, but they view it often as something being wrong. So they can't conceive, because remember, we all project from our perception. So the dismissive avoidant in their internal reality is like, for me to want to move that quickly, I would have to be hiding from something. I would have to be running from something. I would have to be overly attached too quickly, because they're not looking at it like, oh, everybody has different unique sets of programming. People have different attachment styles and they have different paces that they want to move. They see that as a red flag. And to a certain degree, it could be. It's a red flag to be in either polarity to a certain degree. But they see that as like a something to be really made aware of. And then what do you think happens next? Then they pull away, which triggers the anxious preoccupied attachment system even more, which then, sort of spins the cycle in the dating phase to become pretty problematic. So what do we do? Well, number one, we have to get really clear about expectations. The amount of communication that's expected from both attachment style, is each of the attachment styles as well. Dismissive avoidance, as a general rule, would like to text in the first 2 months of a dating phase, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and see each other maybe once or twice a week if they really like somebody. The anxious preoccupied would like to text all day, every day. And I'm not saying that in like a rude way or a negative way. That's actually like what most anxious preoccupied individuals want, even before they're like, oh, this is a person I can see myself being in a relationship with. If they feel like there's a strong attraction or there's a little bit of feelings, that's usually the pace. And I've worked with so many anxious clients over the years, and they'll be like, what's going on that this person isn't texting me back? And like that they wait 3-4 hours without texting back. And that feels bad. Not just because of the unconscious expectations you carry, and then because we all project from our perception, project onto the other person, right? And then you see this, I hope, which is, well, for me to wait for 3 or 4 hours, something would have to be wrong. So both parties are doing that. And then they're like, okay, well then, and then some of the protest behaviors can emerge, things like that, but they usually don't happen until a little bit later on. So, or at least happen more later on. So both people project from their perception instead of surfacing their own expectations and recognizing that people have different sets of programming, and to work to see people as they are, not as we are, right? And as long as we see people in the relationships around us as we are, and we assume that they are some version of us, we will create unnecessary conflicts by accident. So this is the dynamic. And then what we need to actually move through this, one thing that an anxious preoccupied person can do to regulate if they're in this dating phase and they're struggling with the texting, is they can ask themselves, okay, for how long I've been in a relationship, what is a healthy or fair amount of texting and connection? And what I would advise is, if you're in the first 1 or 2 months of dating, you do not have to talk to somebody every day. I would say if you speak to them like 3-4 times a week, and you really like them, then that's a healthy amount. That's usually how a secure person will be. If you're getting past 2 months of dating, or in the later end of 2 months of dating, and you start like, okay, things are really moving along, things are going well, and then you start texting every day, once or twice a day, great. You're on a really healthy track. More than that, when it's like we text all day, every day, we honestly take ourselves out of our own lives. We take ourselves out of being present. We enter into somewhat codependent patterns. And if we have a higher need for connection, because we have a big bucket for connection, we still can do that in a really healthy way. So we could do like a morning call on the way to work and an evening call before bed as we're progressing in the dating stages, even though that's almost like more of a honeymoon stage type of thing. But you can talk on the phone once or twice a week, see each other a little bit more. And ideally what's happening is you are really truly treating the first couple months of dating as a time to like uncover who somebody is and seriously if they fit into your life and if you fit into their life. And we might see the most amazing side of people for the first month. And then we might start seeing red flags. And then we have to really assess those red flags and ask ourselves, are these solvable problems? Like, is a red flag that somebody uses words that I don't like? And is that like something that they can never change and it's impossible? I don't know. Have I asked them? I have to have that conversation. And if somebody says, I'm never changing the way I speak for you, like, okay, then that might be a continued red flag. But we have to look, okay, these are the things that bother me. They're raising a flag. The flag doesn't mean that that person's an evil, bad person and it's never going to work. We have to assess, is this solvable? How will we find out? Only through having conversations about it. Okay, so if a red flag is that the person drinks too much or the person has an unhealthy relationship to both of their parents, and we're like, okay, you know, is that because of your communication? Is that because of your parents, and maybe you've been through a lot and like you've had to set these really strong boundaries because you have really unhealthy people around you? Then we might appreciate and love them more for how they're showing up. Or we might find, wait, they have unhealthy relationships to every family member, and it seems to actually be a them problem, and it's how they communicate, and it's how, so we have to open the dialogue around these things. We have to say, hey, what's going on here and what's happening and we have to ask ourselves, you know, does this look like this person's willing to work on these things, work through these things, take accountability? Are they already taking action? Maybe they drink every day and you're like, I don't know if that's a good thing. Have a conversation. Let's get clear. Let's see where they're at and why. Are they drinking one drink a day and it's just like sort of their thing they do after work? Or do they come home and drink, you know, multiple drinks every day and they have an unhealthy relationship to alcohol? So like, you have to have those conversations and find those red flags. The absence of that means that those red flags are going to show up as problems later, fights later, chaos later. So we have to do ourselves the justice by researching a person and finding things out. And this is not like being overly cautious. This is you actually showing up in the relationship to yourself and valuing your time and recognizing that, hey, as a human being, I'm giving my divine gift that I have on this planet, in this life, of my time to somebody. And I have to do my due diligence to make sure that that time is being given to people who are going to, you know, benefit me back, and that there's going to be healthy dynamics and we can help each other and grow together and love one another in a healthy way. And not, I'm going to give my time in a way that becomes problematic, or that's like throwing my time away because I'm working on something and somebody's not showing up in response. So that's what the dating phase is for. When we have these two dynamics, it's very important that the anxious preoccupied person start by writing all out on a piece of paper. And this is actually in the advanced anxious preoccupied course. What are all of my expectations when it comes to dating? And what do I think this dismissive avoidant person's expectations are when it comes to dating? And write all of those out. And at like what you think from what you're seeing. So that way we're not doing this like thing where we just, like we were talking about, project from our perception. We're not like, oh, the person's not texting me back for 3 hours and there must be something wrong. Because for me to not text back for 3 hours, that would indicate a problem. We have to actually actively practice seeing somebody else's programming as being different from our own, and then doing the work to understand, okay, this is what I think about this person and what their expectations probably are. Here are mine, and then what's healthy. And if I don't know what theirs are, we don't have to mind read either. Like, here's what I can understand about their programming so far and what makes sense based on patterns, but I'm not attached to like, this is exactly how it is. And if I have questions or I need clarification, I'm going to go to that person and have those conversations. Okay. And this is how we start out the dating phase of the relationship on the right foot. Otherwise, we'll see both people polarize each other and trigger each other. Okay. And that's obviously very common in the AA-DA dynamic. So those are some really important starting points for the dating phase. And then we're going to talk about the honeymoon and the power struggle phase. But I'm going to come back here for a moment and just answer some more questions from you guys. Okay, so Rochelle says, for the 90-day challenge, you mentioned to do 2 courses in a month, but what I usually do is repeatedly do the exercises from a single course every day till I get really good at it and then go to the next course. Is that okay, or should I actually do 2 courses a month? You should do absolutely what you've been doing. So we suggest the 2 courses a month because it's like for a goal for people that's like, this sets the tone. But I cannot stress enough the importance of doing things in a way that works for you. And like part of what I really like about doing a school, because obviously I've seen many, many one-on-one clients for years and years, is one of the things I like, and some of the really great feedback we actually also got in the PDS success stories, is that like, this is here to empower people, right? And like, no matter how much information I have, no matter how many certifications and whatever I have, at the end of the day, like, only we know ourselves, right? So everything that you hear or say, you have to take and be like, what works for me? I'm a unique human being with thousands upon thousands of my own programs and perceptions and beliefs. And I have to take this and plug this into my life. So it's a great goal to have, to do that many courses, but like, ultimately pick a goal that works for you. I'm going to put a video in the Facebook group that says that. And then your goal is to meet those goals that you've set out for yourself in that 90 days. And so, and the main focus there is for it to be community. So great question. Thank you for asking that. And great work. What you're doing is fantastic. Thank you so much, Max. Hello, Kelly. Hello, Julia. The Core Wounds course. Yes, Antonio. Amazing. John Gottman's work is really helpful. I have the card deck app on my iPhone, but no one yet to try it on. I play it with myself sometimes. When I'm sitting in like a waiting room for something, or if I'm like in line, I'll like go through the questions myself sometimes. We can always do that too. I love that you brought that up. And hi, Joanne, how are you today? I hope you're having a really nice day. Okay, so Jennifer says, my father never gives me credit, always brings up past mistakes, having nothing to do with who I am now. I get so triggered and argue. This happens over and over again. How can I get out of this dynamic? Number one, as soon as a past mistake gets brought up, this is what you say. Validate this person's feelings who's doing that. Ask him what he's trying to say. So you can say, hey, I see that you feel that way right now. I see that you feel that that's what's happening. But I'm curious as to like what you're trying to get out of bringing that up, because right now, who I am is not that person. And so sometimes when you bring up the past, I feel like really unseen and unheard and misunderstood. And I want you to see me now for who I am and how I've grown and the ways that I've developed. And I'm curious to know like what you're trying to get out of bringing the past up in that way, because it seems to be a pattern. So there must be a need behind it. And I would try to open that up and have that kind of vulnerable conversation, because not only are you kind of calling him out for saying, you're always bringing up the past and it's not very constructive, but you're also vulnerably trying to connect and understand it and see, like, obviously it's coming from a wound or need within him. And then it wounds you in a way because it makes you feel like, why are we going back to this stuff? And then you feel really unseen and unheard. So that's how I would approach it 100%. And great question. Those can be challenging dynamics. Okay. So, the next question. Okay, so A here, trying to figure out my girlfriend's attachment style. She lives in Colombia. Well, in quarantine, we would speak always. She would get anxious every 2 to 4 hours if I didn't contact. Also, she got anxious because she hadn't seen her son. Now she's with her son. She's more calm, but longer anxious for me. Then I feel unimportant, but question, can being with her son calm her anxiousness, and therefore it's not portrayed onto me because I really want that attention? Would this make her an AA? I would say she sounds like she definitely has a very anxious side. But it's very, very, very rare that 2 anxious people are in a dynamic together and it gets off the ground. It's usually that one person's more rooted and secure and another person has more anxious edges in a way, or that one person is FA with a strong anxious side. So I'm curious, like, do you or her either have very secure behaviors where you're able to talk things through, express your needs, be vulnerable, all those different things, or Is there a dynamic where one of you deactivates a lot and pulls back or pushes away or gets a little bit volatile sometimes with like the push-pull, like sudden changes in patterns and behaviors? And then I would sort of see which person is rooted more in a different attachment style, or at least has a strong balance of another attachment style in there. Great question. Okay, so the next question I see for me, Magni. Hi, Magni. Hello, Essie. How are you? Okay, so Magni says, I hope the school is going well, Magni. I know I say that every time I see you, but I just always think of that now. When a DA has some strong needs in the relationship, but then the needs change after a breakup, does that mean they could have been deactivating strategies and not really needs? It will depend on the context of the situation. Here's why. The DA, in the time that they have the strong needs, if they are consistent, they are needs. But often for a DA who is not healing or working on healing, they are only really aware of their survival needs, not so much their emotional needs. How do we know? Because we will always see dismissive avoidance when they're not healing, not working on themselves, be excellent at knowing their boundaries. Like, I need time to myself. I need to get away. I need to get off this situation. But it's all to self-regulate. It's all to like feel like, okay, I have control again. I'm okay. I'm safe. Like a lot of it's based on trying to just get into a safe dynamic with themselves to self-soothe. Then, so in your context, if you're talking about somebody specifically, then like it's also very possible that as the DA is healing, they start becoming aware of their emotional needs, not just their survival needs. And that's a part of healing dismissive avoidant attachment style. So then we might see the breakup happens, it's a catalyst, and now this person's starting to really understand their needs beyond just their survival needs. And so that's what I probably think the context of the dynamic might be. But everything is still a need. So it can be a need at like a different level of living. Like, for example, if I have been up for, let's say I was helping a friend or I was seeing somebody in the hospital and I like was up for, very long hours, not sleeping very many hours at night, like really invested somewhere, I can still have a really big personality need for emotional connection. But like, I might just need to sleep. I might just need some space. I just might need some time to like take it easy for a minute and catch up on rest. So we might just have different needs that are interacting, that are showing up and taking place, not necessarily a part of our entire programming, but that are tertiary needs that are coming into play. And because dismissive avoidance are in a dysregulated state, they're often very much in sympathetic nervous system for prolonged periods of time, and they have a hard time down regulating. They act more in their survival needs. And so that's going to impact the way they show up in a relationship. Absolutely. So I hope that makes sense. It's an excellent, excellent question. And remember, our personality needs change over time as well as we heal, as we go through big life changes, these sorts of things. And it's good to check in with your personality needs and update. Like, what are they right now every 3 to 6 months or after any major event that changes in our life? So great questions, you guys. Okay, let me see here for a second. So my cursor did a little jump. Okay, so I'm going to answer a couple more questions and then I'm going to dive into the next stage of a relationship. We're going to talk about the honeymoon and power struggle phase. Let me see here. Simba's wishing you a happy birthday too. Thank you, Julia. So sweet. That's so funny. It's when he was barking. Hello, Megan. How are you? Thank you so much. Hello, Minerva. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, Ben. Hello, Adriana. Hi, guys. Just FYI, thank you, Thais, for all your work. It's the best thing I ever invested in, and I appreciate you. The past question about my girlfriend, I need to let you know we're in a long-distance relationship. Yeah, I saw that part from earlier. Thank you so much for that really kind comment. That's amazing. Hello, Mikey. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second. Thank you so much, Ben. Honestly, everybody was like, oh, she should take a day off. And I love doing these things. Like, this doesn't feel like I'm working at all. So it's not even a second thought for me, but thank you. I appreciate that. And your kind words. Okay. So let's talk for a moment about the power, well, I'll talk about the honeymoon, but I really want to like spend a moment on the power struggle. Because it's a very important dynamic. So honeymoon phase. The things that really connect AAs and DAs in the honeymoon phase of a relationship are the needs that so number one is like huge point of attraction between these two. When we talk about like the three factors that really create attraction between different attachment styles, we know one of the biggest three factors that leads to attraction is all about the subconscious mind wanting trait variety and wholeness, equilibration. So we already know, as you guys know very, very well at this point, that the subconscious mind wants wholeness, wants equilibrium. And we also know that from a biological survival perspective, trait variety is a very attractive thing. And so when we see somebody expressing our repressed traits, it's very attractive. Okay. And this can be attractive, like somebody we admire, somebody we like look up to. It doesn't have to be like physical, sexual attraction. Or it can be like, it obviously can also be physical, sexual attraction. So we have these really polarized dynamics, which makes these individuals very attractive to one another. And both parties carry one another's shadow side to a certain degree. The dismissive avoidant is in an anxious relationship to themselves, and the anxious preoccupied is in a dismissive avoidant relationship to themselves, which brings us to our second major factor of attraction, which is the subconscious comfort zone. So we are attracted to what our subconscious comfort zone is, which is what that zone is in the relationship to ourselves first. I hope that makes like perfect sense. So the dismissive avoidant, just to make it really clear, is in the anxious relationship to themselves. So that's their subconscious comfort zone. So they feel really comfortable and familiar when they're around an anxious preoccupied and vice versa. So when we go into the honeymoon phase, this is where a lot of this is happening. It's sort of like the neurochemicals are high, that attraction is high. A lot of those dynamics are there. And so the honeymoon phase between the DA and AA can actually be quite good if they really make it through that first big roadblock, which is the commitment, the texting, the expectations. And this can often happen because dismissives, when they're feeling like in the dating phase of a relationship, they don't feel as vulnerable because there's not as much commitment, as much connection, as much closeness and investment. So vulnerability feels lower, AKA those big core wounds are triggered less. And then anxious preoccupied, they have a little bit less attachment and investment, which means the fear of abandonment is obviously dampened. But also, anxious preoccupied are very aware about how to date as a general rule. So a lot of them are very clear about like not be, coming across as too needy and like monitoring their behavior and knowing when to pull back. It doesn't mean they won't act on that a significant amount, but they've also usually in the dating phase of a relationship sort of reeled that in. So then we progress into the next phase of a relationship, and both parties are usually in a pretty good place during the honeymoon phase because again, neurochemicals are high, wounds being triggered are a little bit lower. And then the power struggle phase happens. And this is as we adapt, because human beings are very adaptable. We definitely adapt to our circumstances and environment. And over time, that original high with all that excitement and neurochemistry and everything thriving and flowing starts to die down a little bit. And this is where, like, relative to that high dying down, now it feels as if some of the wounds get louder. And whatever we haven't been vulnerable about and communicated about or through yet is now going to get really clear and apparent. And this is where we see the biggest problems. This is like, where we see, for example, so like between these two, dating phase can have its own little difficulty to actually get into the commitment. Then honeymoon phase is generally like more smooth sailing. And then power struggle phase is where we really like hit and run into like the big problems. How we talked about earlier, how like the fearful avoidant, we talked about yesterday, how the fearful avoidant, they tend to leave, or like their relationships tend to end the most in the power struggle phase, and stability phase is a big place that FA relationships end. Because it's really outside of their subconscious comfort zone and for many other reasons. But these two together, power struggle phase is where this ends. If they get to the stability phase, this is usually very cementing for their relationship. Okay. If they get to the commitment phase, sometimes there can be minor roadblocks of like old programs and fears showing up a little bit, but usually very cementing. The really big phase, it's most problematic, really the two, dating, if you get through dating, honeymoon's great, power struggle. So I'm trying to make it really clear that like different attachment style combinations have different challenges at different phases in a different way. Okay. So what are the major challenges in the power struggle phase? Well, number one, something we'll often see is that the dismissive avoidance starts to feel very vulnerable and starts to feel afraid. And a lot of doubts for the DA come up in this phase, not necessarily because they're doubting the connection or doubting the person, but because they're triggered by their own fears. And then they have more deactivating thoughts. So thoughts or excuses to push the person away. Now, if an anxious person in that phase was, and not at all, just to be super, super clear, putting this on like, this is what the anxious person should do, and it's mutually exclusive and it's just their responsibility. What I'm saying is like, what would be beneficial and if the anxious preoccupied was able to do this, if in that phase, when they feel the dismissive partner pulling away, this is what a secure person does. They feel the partner pulling away. They don't jump to conclusions or make assumptions. They just stay where they are, steady, consistent. They're clear about what they want, how they want to show up. They don't personalize the behavior, and they talk about it and address it if need be, and they communicate their needs. And what the anxious preoccupied feels when this happens, which is not a fun thing to see a change in the pattern, especially when you've got these abandonment wounds, they feel, oh my gosh, the relationship is ending. It's over. There's a change in the pattern. Where like for the DA, when they start doing it, it's not really starting that way. It can become that when there's like this push-pull, and then if protest behaviors come up and criticism and things like that, but usually it's just them trying to like soothe some of what they're dealing with all of a sudden. It's like, whoa, I'm feeling these things. And if there's somebody there that's consistent and just stays in their space and communicates their needs in a healthy way and then appreciates when those needs are met, it's much easier to move through. But when there's unconscious communication, painful dynamics that come up, fears, a lot of activating strategies that makes the DA feel like, whoa, I can't self-soothe or regulate, then the DA starts building up their own like set of walls to try to protect themselves, right? So it's not the anxious person's fault. It actually starts, if you made it to the power struggle phase, it almost always starts with the dismissive avoidance starting to go through things that changes the pattern. And that's what originally sets off this dynamic. But then we'll see this very strong push-pull where then the AA comes towards, and then the DA needs to pull away more to try to get there. It's like they need to catch their breath and self-soothe and regulate and figure out where they're at. And if that space is held, then usually things progress again. But the anxious preoccupied person has to really do two things here. And this is like their healing. They have to work on questioning their stories. It's actually three things. They have to work on meeting their own needs. And they have to work on communicating and advocating for their needs and setting boundaries. So because this isn't like a one size fits all. Sometimes we'll get a dismissive avoidant in an interaction who is not able to come back, who's not able to show up in a healthy way. And then it's not just like, oh, this little phase for a second where this person pulled back and they just have to regulate. And if we just make it through that little phase for a moment, we can keep progressing and doing healthy things and communicating effectively. Sometimes the dismissive avoidant core wounds are a 9 out of 10 and they're getting really loud. Usually you'll see some indications of that in the dating and honeymoon phase, if that's the case. So in the theory that I'm talking about right now, where you've made it to the power struggle phase and now you're just seeing these things sort of for the first time, it's not likely that it's a very strong set of wounds that are in there. But let's say that there are. Well, then the anxious preoccupied has to like communicate their needs, set their boundaries, show up in the relationship to themselves to the nth degree, but also assess like, if I'm putting in the work, if I'm going to communicate my needs and boundaries, is this person coming with me? Are they going to meet me part way? And if they're not, then is this a healthy relationship for me to be in, right? And so both parties need to be able to assess that. And what often happens and where this goes south quickly in the power struggle phase is the DA has stuff coming up They don't know how to make sense of it. They just know that they feel a certain way towards the relationship that's making them want to withdraw or pull back. Then the AA gets really triggered, and sometimes the AA loses their ability to really see the other person because, again, we project from our perception. And the AA sometimes when they're very triggered, they sympathize more than they empathize. And it's really important, again, to distinguish that difference. The AA goes, if I was pulling back, I would want somebody to come towards me. I would want somebody to reel me in, to fix it, to change it, to fight for me. And they assume that their partner is doing that and wants the same things, but it's usually the exact opposite. And then the dismissive avoidant, who usually carries a big wound about feeling unseen, unheard, or misunderstood, is saying, hey, I need space. And then they're feeling like that's not being respected and not being seen, heard, and understood. And then some of the things they were originally really getting out of the relationship, which was feeling emotionally supported, feeling connected, feeling seen, all these different things they feel like are being taken away. And then they get hurt, and the dismissive avoidant often struggles to know how to express their feelings, express their truth, because remember, a long, long time ago, the DA wrote off the ability, their belief that people can see and hear them and want to connect with them. And so then these things become problematic, and it's like this cycle kicks off. And then we have one person triggering the other person, which then triggers the other person back, right? DA pulls away, triggers the abandonment wounds for the AA. AA feels like, oh my gosh, I need to come towards, triggers the vulnerability, unsafety, unheard, unseen wounds, and the dismissive avoidant who further pulls back, and then we're just locked in a vicious cycle. So how do we step out of it? Well, number one, we need to understand like what's actually happening. If we don't understand, we personalize instead. And that's why emotional literacy, having awareness of attachment dynamics, knowing that there's different phases of a relationship with different rites of passage, is so important to start off with. And number two, we have to work on accepting the markers of the rites of passage, you could say, for the power struggle phase are we vulnerable? Are we communicating effectively? Are we working to accept that this person is different from us, or our ideas about them, our story that we created about them? Because we're falling in love with that story of a person in the dating and power struggle and honeymoon phase. And in the power struggle phase, that story comes crashing down for both parties, for any parties, even two secure people. This is happening to a certain degree. So what do? We have to be able to start. So those three things, communicating. So showing up, both parties have to show up for their needs, and both parties have to over explain why, because that's how we get to see each other. That's how we get context. So the dismissive avoidant has to be able to say, I just like to spend more time alone. I need to self-soothe a little bit. I'm still interested in you in the relationship, but this is how I tend to operate. This is what I need. They need to speak up and communicate. That will help the anxious not personalize things so much. And the anxious has to communicate back. I feel afraid. I could use some reassurance. Can you reassure me? So communication has to be brought up, talking about your wounds, your fears in relationships, your needs, almost most importantly. And then both parties have to just be able to see their needs through. It doesn't end there. It's a continuation of communication. It's, this is what's going on. Here's what I need. Where are you at? What do you need? And then this is where that ingredient of acceptance really kicks in. And this is where we can actually start accepting the dynamics here and going, okay, like I see that you have different programs and different needs. And when both parties start to work to meet each other's needs and be respectful and mindful of them, while also taking oneself into consideration, this is where we start to see people emerge from the power struggle itself. So there's obviously so much more to say about this. I'm doing full for next month. You'll see it on the calendar. We're doing full like advanced attachment style workbook webinars where we're going to talk about the power struggle and like how to actually navigate through it, and some other, there's so much more to say. But I do want to answer 2 or 3 last questions before we wrap this webinar and jump into the next one. Okay, so the next one I see, hi, Mikey. Okay, so Andrea, how are you? Okay, so Andrea says, is it ever a good idea to try to facilitate better communication between anxious and avoidant family members, or is it best to set boundaries and remove myself, I'm a DA, from the situation? I think that part of what keeps a dismissive avoidant in that space of staying dismissive avoidant is the lack of communicating oneself. So what I see happen really often with DAs, and this is through like hundreds of conversations with DAs and like asking and asking because I'm a very curious person. I've often seen it like this. It's like the dismissive avoidant feels unseen and unheard. Well, first of all, the dismissive avoidant feels emotionally neglected and then feels like it's up to me to meet my own needs in the world and to show up for myself in the world because nobody else will do it. Then they get into a dynamic with family members or friends or relationships where they have a need and they want to communicate and they want to speak up, but they go, well, why bother? It's not going to work anyways, or it's not going to happen anyways. And then what happens? Well, then you feel really unseen, unheard, and misunderstood. And part of healing your attachment style is actually being able to show up for yourself more than for the responses to what you think will happen. So it's actually prioritizing, like, hey, irrespective of what outcome I might have, whether people understand me or not, I deserve to advocate for my needs in my relationship to others. And I'm going to show up and not emotionally neglect my own needs around my family members by communicating them. And in doing so, you get seen and heard. Maybe you won't always get understood because maybe people will have their own wounds and triggers, but the vast majority of the time you will, and you'll make progress. And by consistently advocating for your own needs in your relationship with others as a dismissive avoidant, that is a massive part of your healing work. So that's what I would advise big time. And you can, if you don't see that that's working, you can try one time, you can change your approach a second time, you can practice a third time for the sake of you doing that work for yourself. And then if you're like, you know what, I tried, I changed my approach, I showed up, and the person wasn't willing to meet me halfway or to understand, they just couldn't wrap their head around it, then you can go, okay, probably not the healthiest person. Let me set a stronger boundary with this person instead. But I can do that knowing that I showed up in the relationship to myself. So it's a big part of healing, 100%. Awesome. You are awesome. Okay, so the next one I see. So Rebecca, hi Rebecca, how are you? So Rebecca says, I believe my boyfriend is DA. I would like to introduce some of these concepts to him. What is the best way? Great question. Best way by far is to communicate that you're learning about this yourself. A lot of DAs will take, when they originally learn about this, if somebody's pushing it on them, or not that you would push it on them, but like if they feel that way, they'll take it as like you saying something's wrong with them. And that's a core wound for them, and they'll feel shame. Shame makes us want to hide, and then we push away, shut down, and protect ourselves. And then we have no room to hear the information. In fact, we actively associate negative feelings with that information because of how it's making us feel. And then our subconscious mind is wired to avoid pain, so it avoids that negative feelings and avoids that information. So if you lead by example and you say, oh my gosh, I'm learning about attachment theory. It's so interesting. Here's what I learned about me. Here are the different styles. If you actively say as well, this isn't like a diagnosis. This isn't like something you live with for the rest of your life. These are like these subconscious rules we have for how we relate to others, and that's all they really are. And these are the other ones. Which do you identify with? And you list secure in there. And you talk about all the different ones and like what does he identify with and how, where these things come from. If you do it that way and you make it like this interesting, inquisitive thing where nothing's wrong with anyone and you're making that very explicit and clear, then you will often get the intellectual dismissive avoidant, because most DAs are quite intellectual, become curious, and they might actually want to research about it and be interested in the facts around it and what's going on. And so that's always going to be the best way. So great question. Okay, so the last question is, you're so welcome, Hin. So the last question I see is, Magni, I was confused by the video. I'm a bad person. I always thought that was a DA wound as well. And very much so. It's not a wound of mine, but I am not that deeply AA. In fact, In fact, okay, sorry, that was the end of your question. Yeah, so I am bad can be like a more surface level wound for DA, but it's that. So I think what you guys are, or what you might be getting it confused with, is the shame feelings that come. So DAs feel shame, but they feel I am defective. So I am bad is like I did something wrong. Oh, it's not even I did. It's like um I'm a bad person. I'm like an evil person for doing that. Like excessive guilt and feelings of shame. The I am defective is like I am dysfunctional. Like I am like wearing the scarlet letter. Like there's something inherently wrong about me. Not normal, not so different things. Both will cause feelings of shame. I am bad will cause even more feelings of guilt than shame, but shame will also be in there and intertwined. And so sometimes that dynamic can overlap where shame can both be experienced and it can both be very diminishing to a person's self-worth to feel like I am inherently flawed at my core and then to feel like I am inherently bad at my core. But DA is very much more feel dysfunctional, not okay, not like they are a bad person and they have to excessively guilt themselves. FAs feel like, oh my gosh, if I make a mistake or hurt somebody's feelings, I'm like evil right now. I can't believe I did that. I'm such a bad person. And they feel a lot of that like guilt and sort of like sprinkles of shame in there at the same time. So that's the major difference. But the shame piece can overlap a little bit there for sure. Okay, so amazing questions. I think that most of you got your questions answered. Oh, I just saw hearing answer questions about texting has helped me as an AP work on this very specific practice. It spreads out in many areas of my life to becoming secure. I also just recorded. I'm so happy to hear that, Kelly, and thank you for sharing that. I also just recorded a texting series, and when we do the advanced interaction attachment style courses, which will just be one, I said courses, I meant course, which will just be one about the interactions, because I know that's a big thing and you guys have brought it up. It won't be until early next year. I'm going to release the next upcoming courses as well. But we're going to talk about texting in there and all those different dynamics, because I know it plays a big role, especially in the dating phase. So thank you for sharing that feedback. Okay, it's 3:31. I'm jumping into the next webinar. Hello to Mikey and Shuck. Sorry I didn't get to answer your question today. Hi. Hello, Kendra. Thank you so much. And I hope you guys have an amazing day if I don't see you on the next webinar. But a huge, huge thank you for being here and for all the kind words and wishes. I really appreciate it. Awesome. I'm so glad that made so much sense, Magni. Awesome. Thank you guys. Bye. See you in a moment.